Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Hi everyone, I'm Crystal Contreras and I'm the Director of Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. Welcome to today's program with Wall Street Journal reporters Maureen Farrell and Elliot Brown. We're here in honor of their new book, The Cult of WeWork, Adam Neumann, and the Great Startup Delusion. This program will be moderated by Charles Duhigg, author of Smarter, Faster, Better, The Transformative Power of Real Productivity. If you'd like to ask any of our speakers a question during this program, you can do so in the chat or comment section of the live stream that you're watching. The Commonwealth Club is going full speed ahead with the full slate of live and online programming this summer and fall. We ask that you consider donating to the club to help us continue our work this year and beyond. Please visit us at commonwealthclub.org/online to learn more, and you can also click the blue donate button you see on the right side of your screen live during this program. Now, please join me in welcoming Maureen Farrell, Elliot Brown, and Charles Duhigg to Inforum.
Good evening. I'm Charles Duhigg, a writer for the New Yorker magazine and the author of The Power of Habit and Smarter, Faster, Better. And welcome to tonight's virtual program with Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. And it's really a pleasure to have you because this evening we are going to have a fantastic conversation with two of my favorite journalists, Elliot Brown and Maureen Farrell, who are reporters both at the Wall Street Journal and more importantly, co-authors of the brand new book, The Cult of WeWork, Adam Neumann, and the Great Startup Delusion. If you have gotten a chance to read this book, you know that it's amazing. If you haven't yet, you should definitely buy it. It's this investigative look into the rise and fall of WeWork, which, as you're probably aware, garnered quite a bit of attention, most particularly from Elliot and Maureen, who covered it like white on glue. And it's this amazing story of the twisted startup culture that we're living through and how egos interfere with commerce and what happens when impulsiveness and growth and venture capital all come together, and really a tale of the time that we're living in. And before we start, I want to remind all of you that we would love to make this into a conversation. And so please, if you have any questions or comments, please type them into the chat or comment section of however you're watching this talk. And we'll try and get through as many of them as possible. And we would love this to be a real dialogue. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, Maureen and Elliot. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for doing this with us.
Happy to be here.
So I have a huge number of questions for you, but before I jump into them, I want to ask one question, which I thought of for a long time. So I wrote a piece for the New Yorker about WeWork, and I spent years reading your coverage, and your coverage of WeWork was dominant. In fact, it was so dominant that right before the company was supposed to go on the road and start its roadshow, where it was going to tell investors about the companies and hopefully, convince them to buy stock in the IPO, you guys released an article about Adam Neumann on an airplane moving across international boundaries and using some recreational pharmaceuticals. I have two questions. Will you tell us what you learned? And more importantly, how on earth did you discover this? Because I will say, and I don't think I'm overstating this, that article, your coverage, single-handedly blew up the IPO of WeWork with good reason. So, what happened? How did you find out about this?
I can handle that one. So I'll say I was for years obsessed with Adam and private jets, and it started, I think, in 2014 when I heard this guy was, or maybe even 13, when I heard that he was riding around on private jets as the CEO of some rather small startup at the time with a big valuation. But it's like the company's years away from profit. Why is he renting private jets? And so then as I kept sort of digging, I'd find all sorts of crazy things. Like they had a mechanic on staff that they fired out after like 2 days. And so then I would try to like confirm stuff like that. And you kept learning more and more about these private jets. And I really got into it. I started tracking the private jet. And within the context of this, someone said, oh, Adam would do all these things of jets. One person told me he like ripped down credenzas in an airplane, and one a jet rental company kept having to take planes out of service because Adam and his friends would trash them because they would get so drunk on them. And another complained about, people spitting tequila on the plane. So it was just in this context, someone's like, well, yeah. And then this thing happened where the key being that in Israel, they arrive and hadn't finished the marijuana en route. And so then someone decided to stuff it in a cereal box. And then the crew, which was of the plane, which was run by Gulfstream because it was a sort of loaner jet, they were so kind of incensed by this that they just pulled the jet. And so then it's gone. And then, of course, Adam finds a way to go back to the US on another private jet.
And you guys published this story saying that Adam just violated international drug laws and this is the CEO of a company that's what, the most valuable startup in history at this point. It's about to go public. And you also published that he's telling people that he wants to be prime minister of Israel one day, or maybe president of the world, whatever that is, that he's going to be the world's first trillionaire. And you published this article right before they're supposed to go and tell investors, this is why you should invest in WeWork. We promise it's stable. It's a good investment. When you call WeWork to say, look, we're about to go live with this article, what do they do?
Well, so I sent them fact-checking questions I think I called them and said, I've got a lot of anecdotes. I'm going to send them to you. The theme is nothing new, which is that Adam is erratic, but some of the anecdotes are pretty good. And then I send them the anecdotes, and then I get a call back along the lines of, oh my God, this is horrific. Which I didn't expect. I'd sort of become inured to it because, like you said, it was the point of the article, which had been in the works for 9 months, kind of just knowing that there was a news event with WeWork coming and knowing that Adam was this totally erratic, kind of crazy CEO, and the world should know that the guy in charge of the most valuable startup is completely unlike like every other public company CEO, and it's super erratic and kind of crazy. It was just kind of, we were waiting for a time when everyone was paying attention, and then it just really became much more so than I expected. Really striking while the iron was hot. And
basically, sorry, Maureen, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the two of us were teaming up on so many articles. Elliot, this was his article, as he said, had been working on it for 9 months. But I was also, people were just coming to me trying to find out more. And there was a whole cast of characters that this spread to. You could imagine who were just trying to find out more about this article. It was clearly flipping out everyone in sort of the broader ecosystem trying to take this company public.
As it should have, right? Because it literally blows up this IPO. I mean, when I talked to people, bankers involved in this deal, they said, yeah, we thought it was going to be okay. And then we read the article and we were like, nope, it's not going to happen. So let me take a big step back. So WeWork becomes the most valuable startup in history. 10 investors, venture capitalists and other investors pour $10 billion into this firm that essentially is just renting buildings and then renting out small spaces in it. Nothing really new. Like, how did this happen? Why did this insanity seem sane to so many smart people?
I guess a few different things. I mean, number one, Adam Neumann was the most masterful salesman ever. He figured out right away that, he sort of figured out who his client was. And as you say in your article, I mean, his clients were venture capitalists in some ways, more than the people filling up these rooms. Like, he wanted to raise money and get this crazy valuation. And he also just hooked onto this idea that, and it morphed year by year, but that every investor in the world wanted to get the next big thing. They wanted to tap into the next Facebook, the next Google, the next Apple, and get in really early. So he just sort of we all often talk about him as kind of like a magician. He just decided to tell everyone this real estate company was something totally different, and somehow convinced what you would think are some of the most sophisticated investors in the world that this subleasing office space company was first a physical Facebook, and then eventually like an artificial intelligence company. He convinced them all and to value it and let him pour money into building this out, even as he was losing money every step of the way. So there was a WeWork in every city all over the world.
And yeah. Go ahead, Elliot.
Yeah, I guess just a little more broadly, it was, WeWork is by sort of far the craziest of this era. But one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize to people in the book is that it was one of the era. So if you look at Uber, if you look at Casper, if you look at scooter companies, it's all sort of the same effect, where there was too much money trying to get into Silicon Valley, looking for, like Maureen said, the next Facebook. And so what that leads is for everyone to kind of suddenly believe the impossible about where these companies are going to go. And so suddenly Uber isn't just disrupting transportation in urban America. It's the Amazon of transportation that will disrupt walking and make its own flying cars and make its own robot cars. It's like nothing is enough. And so everything has this super high valuation and kind of fantasy dreams to it.
And what I love about the book is it's the story of WeWork, but it's also the story of the period that we're living through. It's a study and an investigation of not just this company, but how did America, how did Silicon Valley and commerce allow this company to exist? And in much the same way that James Stewart's Den of Thieves is like this portrait of the 1980s. The Cult of We, I think, is a portrait of the period that we've just lived through. And everyone in Silicon Valley is smart, right? Like all these people who poured $10 billion into this company, they're all smart people. They all got MBAs from fancy schools. What is going on more broadly that you think makes people willing to suspend disbelief in the way that they clearly had to when they met Adam Neumann?
I mean, I think that seems like just the key question. And I mean, it was a little bit different every step of the way. And it was just sort of mind boggling every step of the way. Like at first it was the venture capitalists. Then it was these sort of sober mutual funds that, they're like bending over backwards for Adam Neumann, making sort of nonsensical decisions, overriding their analysts. Every step of the way, we would see these, the people who could write the checks willing to suspend disbelief. Somehow it was some magical combination of Adam Neumann salesmanship, this private capital, so much private capital chasing this one big idea, something that was going to blow up and explode into this giant company. And then these people that were willing to just jump all in with Adam, even as time and time again, you'd watch their analysts say, the numbers don't make sense. Like, we're looking through this, Adam's making you're hearing all these predictions, but if you look at the past and you look at where they are now, it's sort of impossible that this could work out. And then time and time again, the people who would write the checks would just override the people who worked for them, who were actually looking at the numbers.
It's fascinating. It's totally fascinating. And just to remind everyone who's watching, if you have any questions for Maureen or for Elliot, please feel free to type them into whatever chat you have on your screen right now. We will definitely see them. It's interesting because one of the things that strikes me is that this book is really also a book about the cult of the founder. And the story of the founder has gotten a lot of attention in the last 20 or 30 years, right? We talk about Steve Jobs. We don't talk about Apple. We talk about Steve Jobs and the charisma and the vision that he has. But both of you have been covering business and tech for a long time. Has this been overblown? Like, have we corrected too far? Is Adam Neumann actually a symptom, and WeWork a symptom of a mass hysteria that believes too much in founders and not enough in other things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's at the heart of this whole saga and implosion. I mean, you have in Silicon Valley, there in particular in business, Silicon Valley just really loves going in herds and sort of chasing new ideas with small sample sizes. And so what it's done, these are not small sample sizes by market cap or stock value, but it's looked at Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook and been like, well, all led by founders. So therefore, everything else should try to follow that phenotype. And so then they said, the founder is this ascendant being. And this really started in the mid 2000s, which was a real reversal from the old way of Silicon Valley in sort of the 90s, when they would have founders found companies and then be like, okay, you've done great. We're going to bring in a professional CEO. So they really start kind of lionizing founders and talking about how they're these near messianic beings. And so Adam steps into that. Now, the other thing that then happens is there's so much money that kind of separately but related, they actually give full control to the founder. So they're giving, in some cases, billions of dollars to, certainly hundreds of millions throughout Silicon Valley to these 20-something, 30-something, almost always male, almost always kind of first-time entrepreneurs, maybe second time, and giving them full control of what to do with that money. So you kind of wonder, of course this is going to happen at some point. I mean, of course, someone is going to do something reckless with that money. But the kind of prospect of building the next Apple is what drives it. Now, of course, the thing that people don't mention is that Apple and Amazon, neither of those founders had control. So they actually just, could have been fired, and in Steve Jobs' case, were fired at one point by the board. But it doesn't matter because Mark Zuckerberg has control. So therefore, I want control too, is what they say, and then they get it.
So, and this brings up a question that Jack asked, who's watching the program, which is, there seems to be this culture of eccentricity around founders, right? Like the weirder you are, I've heard some folks refer to it as kind of like Asperger's chic in Silicon Valley. you want to come across as like being really like different and strange, proving that you think differently. And I'm wondering, well, let me ask you guys this. The first time you guys met Adam Neumann before he was the celebrity that he came to be, is he naturally as weird as he eventually became, or is that something that he cultivated? Tell me about what this guy was like when you first met him.
I probably go back first. So I met him in 2013, and he was this total bundle of energy. So go into his office, he's like 40 minutes late, and then sort of summons me, and then we go in and he's like, I want to show you something. And so gets out a laptop and can't figure out how to use the laptop because he's super dyslexic, and he just calls his assistant. He's like, Stella. And she comes in and sort of presses play on QuickTime and shows me this video of him on a boat and at the summer camp. And then he goes on to name drop, Ashton Kutcher and Rahm Emanuel and talk about how they're expanding everywhere. And he was totally charismatic. He was totally friendly and super engaging, and sort of puts you in this time warp where you're living in the future that he's presenting. That said, I did not think that he was going to go on to be the CEO of a $47 billion company. I thought it's like, wow, this guy seems like an energized office space subleasing CEO of a 5-location company. So I think what we saw, and Maureen can speak to this, as time went on, the crazy got turned up kind of year by year.
Yeah, and I met him for the first time before the IPO as they were going in 2019. And I mean, he's I guess two things. I mean, he's, as Elliot said, a bundle of energy. He's all over the place. He's so tall and big. He just commands every room, and his arms are waving. But I think the thing that struck me, the first thing I told Elliot when I left the meeting was he's got charisma. He's got he seems crazy, but he's also, he feels very warm in a way. I thought he was going to be this kind of harsh tech bro and kind of a jerk. And he was totally the opposite. He kind of hooks right in on you and finds some way to connect with you on a kind of a personal level. There's some way he can kind of hook into everyone he meets. And yeah, his warmth, I think, kind of came through, even as he seems totally erratic.
And one of the things that comes through really nicely in your book is how basically the kind of the the governors, which aren't really that strong to begin with, they get looser and looser, right? It starts as a little bit of like a party atmosphere, a kind of Playboy atmosphere, but Adam begins pushing boundaries. He begins, he's using drugs in the office, smoking pot more often. The culture of WeWork becomes increasingly frenetic. I know when I was doing some reporting about it, I was talking to one person who said that she found a different used condom in the stairwell every single day for a week, and like said this as if this was like the least surprising thing she'd ever. But like people are having sex like crazy. He begins living like a rich person. He gets this car and this driver. He punches, I think, his trainer at one point in the offices. Is that the real Adam Neumann coming out more and more and more, or is that a product of the culture that surrounds him? About meeting from SoftBank, Masa Son, who's telling him he's a genius and he has to be crazier, and reacting to that.
I mean, I think it's definitely both, but even among tech founders, even among billionaires, like the way he lived seemed so insane by any stretch of the imagination. Like, it just seems like he took everything. It was definitely something of the culture, but then he took it to a new level. And his wife also. I mean, they had 5 children. They had nannies for each children. They had like 8 houses all over the world. They had the private jet. They were on, everything. They had his surf instructor from Hawaii come and live with them and his family. And like, they had nannies for those kids. Like, everything was just, and then they rented 2 Airbnbs for the surf instructors for all the people.
There were 3 Airbnbs.
3, okay.
To go with their 3 Hamptons homes they owned.
That all the WeWork people would commute to, spend the like 2.5 hours to write their IPO prospectus. Like, it almost was like it almost seemed like a joke, like just how extreme he was living. Like, almost like more trouble than it would be worth in some ways. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's this the notion of like money and power corrupt, and I think that kind of happened with Adam, but it corrupted someone who was already corrupted by the concept of it. And so, he wanted to be rich from day one, living on a kibbutz in Israel, which is kind of an odd lesson to take from a socialist community. But he was very dead set on that. And then sort of the more he gets, the more he wants, and the crazier he acts. And yes, he's being pushed by these investors in Silicon Valley, and then also SoftBank, which is sort of the biggest Silicon Valley investor, even though it's from Japan, to push bigger, push harder. And that's like 100% the notion of what they sort of teach in Silicon Valley school these days, right? It's like nothing is big enough. Everything needs to be bigger. Revolutionizing urban transportation isn't enough. And so he embraces that, I think, in the ambitions for WeWork, but also his sense of self, where he is, literally seeing himself on this global scale where he's on par or above global leaders. And so we actually have a scene where he kind of snubs Justin Trudeau by canceling the Prime Minister of Canada, by just canceling something last minute on it. We'll reschedule it later. And he almost snubs Theresa May from the UK when she comes to town. So it's just, and this was sort of nothing to him. He saw himself above these people.
Yeah. And I want to get into the specifics of the WeWork story and kind of move through some of the timeline and the reporting that you guys did. But one more question about this eccentricity and this kind of nature of the folks. Of course, there's other examples that are going on sort of at the same time, right? There's Theranos. And in fact, one of the audience members, Kawikri, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, it talks about Theranos, and he's wondering about the checks and balances on these eccentric characters. The person running Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, sort of presented herself as an eccentric also, because she knew that that's what investors wanted, with a much darker outcome. She's now under indictment and awaiting trial. But tell me, what do WeWork and Theranos have things in common? Are they different lessons? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So the really interesting thing, I think, when you compare Theranos to WeWork is, Elizabeth Holmes was said she created something that she never did, this blood testing, the ability to test blood, one drop, one pinprick, and they lied about it. They hid this all. There's all this secrecy in the company. Adam Neumann, by contrast, it was all up to a point in plain sight. On the margins, there were definitely times in which he lied about things that we're aware of and other people saw. But basically, I mean, I think what's almost more mind-boggling about the WeWork story is that he didn't hide it. I mean, he would present this grand plan for where the company was going, but they had financials. They showed them to investors. They had historical ones. They had future projections. They didn't line up, and yet he just kept on getting people to ignore what they could see in black and white. So every step of the way, it wasn't fraud in the same way, and yet these sophisticated investors just went along with him. I think that's a big difference.
That's really interesting.
I sometimes use a cheesy bird analogy where what Adam taught people to do was to look at a pigeon and see a swan and sort of just imagine it there. Whereas, Elizabeth Holmes was actually just lying, right? But Adam caused people to delude themselves using actual facts that were real, whereas she kind of makes up facts.
So when I talk to people about WeWork, and you guys lived through this entire story, they talk about the time, the growth of WeWork before and after SoftBank gets involved, the Vision Fund and Masa-san. Tell me a little bit about when SoftBank comes in and they make a huge investment. Tell me what happened there and what the implications of that were.
Sure. So I guess what you want to think about, I mean, they had raised billions of dollars, but it was almost like Adam Neumann and WeWork had kind of tapped out the globe before Masayoshi Son came in and he met SoftBank. This was in late 2016. He'd raised money from venture capital firms, Fidelity, the mutual funds. He found that he went to China. He kept on wanting to raise money to grow this company. But it was getting to a point where almost every big check had been written already to him. There was no one really left to tap. So there was a sense in the board of directors and executives at WeWork that, okay, they're going to have to go public. That's like the only place that you need to keep on raising massive amounts of money to continue growing this company. This company, everyone wants to see growth. So, sort of a vicious cycle. But then somehow, kind of miraculously, he meets Masa, the CEO of SoftBank. And it's such a crazy scene. He meets him. Masa has come to New York from Japan. He's on his way to meet Donald Trump, who has just been elected president. He's on his way to Trump Tower, and he kind of just drops by WeWork and meets Adam, goes on this 12-minute tour and sees WeWork. And he asked Adam to join him in the car ride up to Trump Tower. So over the next half an hour, they basically sketch out and they come up with this plan for $4.4 billion. And I think for Masa to invest in WeWork, it was sort of beyond anything Adam could have imagined at that time, beyond what anyone at WeWork could have imagined. And also says just how kind of crazy this whole process was, that, in a 45-minute car ride, you could come up with a check of that size. But essentially that put this company where it could have been maybe reined in a bit. Adam, some of his his behaviors, the corporate governance, I think there was the sense that public markets would just do the work that the board probably should have done, and others. And instead, Masa comes in and it just fuels the growth, but it also fuels the craziness in every way. And you pump $4.4 billion into a company, and then that much more afterwards. He gives him more. And it's just any sense, it's just the recklessness kind of in terms of what they would spend money on. It really amped everything up.
And this is the period when Adam starts doing really crazy things, right? Like buying a company that makes waves and pools, like so that you can surf in a swimming pool, or investing in performance mushrooms created by the professional surfer Laird Hamilton.
Excuse me, that's a coffee creamer.
Sorry.
That it ends up going in. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, and it's interesting because this money sort of gives permission, as you guys were mentioning before, for the crazy to really come out, but it also sets this company on a path where going public becomes an absolute necessity at some point, right?
Yeah, so they had this sort of magic way to ever say that profits were always on the horizon, and so yet every year the losses would basically double. And when you start at a certain number, like you're losing 1 billion a year, then the next year you lose 2 billion. The next year you're on track to lose 4 billion. So like you're going to need more money than sort of has ever been given before in the private markets. So with Masa have given him this task to keep growing, and in one case, he really just incentivized him to only grow revenue and focus on that and not care about profits. Adam started spending on lots of things that were particularly dumb, and talked about even kind of crazier acquisitions like buying Lyft and buying Sweetgreen and the salad company, because salads have a lot of symbiosis with offices, and so they're burning all this cash, and then SoftBank finally kind of gets cold feet. They had been totally gung-ho on WeWork, and Masa had called it, one of the world's great companies in the future, and thought it was going to be worth $10 trillion. But then kind of realizes his investors aren't into it. His stock price is taking a real hit. And so he stops funding Adam. And so that suddenly leaves Adam kind of out to dry with this massive amount of money being lost every day. I think it was $3,000 a minute at the start of 2019. And so suddenly he's on this path to like, I need a lot more money and I need it in a really big way. And there's only one place that you can get that at that point. And that's an IPO, public listing.
And this actually is a question from Susan in the audience. She says, when you're doing an IPO, all these people are supposed to come in and start giving you good advice, right? You have all these bankers who are supposed to start telling you, this is what you need to do, and you need to clean up this, and and the board of directors is supposed to be there to the adults in the room that suddenly start saying like, okay, look, before we sell this to mom and pop, we need to make sure that everything's on the up and up. And so the question that Susan asked is, so what happened to this due diligence that's supposed to happen before an IPO? Like why does it take an article from you guys to stop this IPO from happening rather than all these people who earn tens of millions of dollars because they're supposed to step in and stop bad things from happening?
It's a great question. And I think it just speaks so clearly to kind of the incentives, the sad incentives of the system, including the underwriting system. Basically, there's this hope. I mean, it carries so much weight to be the lead left underwriter of an IPO, basically the bank that leads IPOs. And it has so much cachet, especially in Silicon Valley, to have been the person who, leads Facebook's IPO.
And just to be clear, it's called lead left because they're literally on the left side of the cover page, right? They're at the top of the left side of the cover page. And,
yes.
And it also means you get the biggest fees, right?
Yeah, the biggest fees, the most coveted. It's the coveted spot right there. So what Adam Neumann did, like so many other things, he just really played the bankers off of each other, basically till the bitter end. There's something in most IPOs that's called a bake-off. You invite the bankers in to come and pitch you on how your company can go public. I mean, one of the things we have in the book and we heard was, it was Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley were the three that came in to pitch Adam and his team. And I mean, Goldman Sachs came in with a pitch deck and they were all telling him that it was going to be worth more than $50 billion, up to $100 billion. But Goldman Sachs, their pitch deck was comparing Adam and the company. They had Lin-Manuel Miranda in their slides. They had a slide with Mother Teresa on it. And they were comparing the company to Apple, all these tech companies, and saying you could be $1 trillion company. So every step of the way, instead of giving, like at so many other junctures, but including with the bankers, instead of sort of saying, people are going to be worried about this, and maybe they would at times, they would just kind of go along with what Adam and his wife, Rebecca, wanted. She took a big role in this. And what we saw was this really kind of S1, this prospectus that they wrote that was sort of quickly made a mockery. I mean, it became like a joke.
And the S1. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Elliot.
I was just to say, not only does history repeat itself, but business books, written by journalists at the Wall Street Journal, repeat themselves. So in Barbarians at the Gate, there's this scene toward the end where the bankers of RJR Nabisco and are talking about this buyout, and they are just arguing for hours between, I think it's Salomon Brothers and one of the other banks over who is going to be lead left, on the tombstone for doing the merger, and they the deal nearly completely falls apart because of this exact thing. And so the same thing happened. The ego was totally what was at stake here, and to the point where actually the fees on the IPO were going to be the same for Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, because WeWork was like, we should kind of camp this down a little. But they continue to just obsess over who was going to be lead left.
And I want to talk about that, the greed and the ego. Maureen, you had mentioned Rebecca, Adam's wife, and who belatedly was identified as a co-founder of WeWork. Tell me a little bit about her. Was she a real influence in the company?
Sure. Yeah. She seemed like she was a huge influence on the company. And even just from the beginning, he met her right when he started the predecessor company to WeWork, Green Desk. It was a smaller company in Brooklyn that sort of did the same thing. And it just seems like from the minute he met her, I mean, she grew up in the New York area. She was a cousin of Gwyneth Paltrow. She was very wealthy. She had these Hollywood connections. And from the minute he met her, it sort of, everyone says it just sort of amped up what he wanted and the life he wanted to live. She kind of saw things he had never seen before. And yes, at the company, I mean, her role was a murky one. She, as you said, she was retroactively made a co-founder at some point in 2014, 2015. But she took a bigger and bigger role. She would jump around to a lot of different roles in marketing and branding. They had a number of children, so she would leave for a year or so here at times for maternity leave. But by the end, it seemed like her role, she became more and more kind of obsessed with playing a bigger role. And she got very involved in writing the IPO prospectus. And I mean, some of the parts of the IPO prospectus that we've seen, some of the phrases that have jumped out at us, like the dedication of the IPO is to the energy of we. It's something she came up with. She wanted to have a book dedication. And there was money spent on these, the photographs. They would do maybe 100 iterations of some of the photographs in the IPO prospectus that, you never hear about people spending that much time on.
And people told me inside the company that when she would arrive at the offices, people would scurry so that she couldn't meet them, because she had this ability. She would meet someone and say oh, you have bad energy. And then that person would get fired because they have bad energy, according to Rebecca. It's a really interesting, and it sounded to me like always this very toxic environment for anyone except for the people at the top, because you could be fired on a whim.
She has a lot of the great quotes in the book where what one employee once told me was, being around Rebecca was like nails on a chalkboard. And so, yes, you would cower. But so she was constantly giving grief to designers who were working on oftentimes her own personal projects. And so one designed an office for her, and she gets in and sees that her new office on the 6th floor is smaller than Adam's office significantly. And she says, my soul can't breathe. And
actually this is a question from the audience from Raquel, who asks, because there is another co-founder, an actual co-founder of WeWork, this guy named Miguel McKelvey. But he's really not mentioned much. He's not a part of the story. Why is that? What is the role that Miguel plays, and why don't we heap praise or blame at his feet?
So he co-founded it with Adam. He had a background in architecture. He what we've heard him say, that he said, is he didn't like to be the center of attention. He liked to be near the center of attention. So he was always, at the beginning, it seemed like he did a lot of work. And one of the big sort of true innovations of WeWork was really the aesthetic and the architecture. I mean, they're really beautiful to go into, and they've been copied many times now, but the glass walls and kind of the look of it. And Miguel was very much part of that, sort of seeing what this office space could look like. But over time, his role, he sort of started taking a step back. I mean, I think he would say to people, I like to start projects. I don't always like to finish them. So he was nothing like Adam. He kept his role, but just scaled it back, would just jump around to different projects on the periphery. It sounded like, I mean, at some point they renegotiated the split. He didn't want to build this big company. Adam wanted to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. So he said, yes, you can go. If it gets above a certain size, we've heard it was sort of an 85% 15 split. So he just took a smaller role. He took a smaller portion of the economics of the company and just kind of did what he could in different ways. But it's hard. Yeah, he didn't fight back against some of the, negative things at the company, which I think I think a lot of employees really liked and respected him, and at times wish he took more of a stand against some of the things that they were seeing Adam doing.
Yeah.
But he was very much on the periphery, and I think kind of his minimal role in the book, it's a sort of a reflection of that.
So they get this huge amount of money from SoftBank and from Masason, and they start growing at a breakneck pace. It becomes clear that they're going to have to go public. The bankers are completely checked out. They're basically just trying to get their name on the front of the offering. They start writing, as you mentioned, the S1. And for those folks who don't know, the S1 is like the prospectus for a company during an IPO. It's the thing that lays out what the company is. And if everything had gone according to plan, we would be talking about what a genius Adam Neumann is, and it would be one of the most successful IPOs of all time. But what happens?
So this is the Emperor's New Clothes moment, the parade, where everyone sees the reality. So WeWork, had been built up, as this tech company, this disruptive startup for 9 years, and then they have to make all of their financials public. And so even though it had been written many times that they lost money, it had been Wall Street Journal, been in other publications, even though we knew about all these conflicts of interest, or some of the conflicts of interest that Adam had, when you put out this document, I think they did it in a way that was just sort of so crazy that people couldn't ignore it. So it hits in August, and everyone in the whole world can just go to the SEC's website and see the scale of the losses, which were like $2 billion the prior year, and on pace to go even worse. And you can see that this basic business doesn't work. Then you also see that it's written in this crazy way where you dedicate it to the energy of we, and it's sort of a little indecipherable what the business is. And then you have this incredibly long list of Adam's conflicts of interest. And so some of the stuff that we'd written about how he had taken out hundreds of millions of dollars beforehand and was just living this incredibly rich life, how he was buying properties and leasing them to the company. So like you could imagine that's not a very, at arm's length negotiation with your landlord if your landlord is your CEO. And then, I think one of the things that actually Adam barely even knew about, but just the irony was so incredibly rich, was that he had initially trademarked the word we and now sold it to the company for $6 million in stock. So he one of the more selfish people on the planet, as far as we could tell, was now profiting off the word we at a company named We.
And so the public learns about this, and what's the reaction? Like, I mean, because we're not totally surprised by like greedy people acting in greedy ways, but why did this come as such a shock?
I think it was just the sum total of all of these things. I remember talking to a lawyer that day who had worked on a lot of these IPOs and a lot of these like very founder friendly IPOs. And I remember him saying there's basically like a menu you can pick from, and they all could be, maybe there's like 10 different things you could do to really give things to the founder versus the company. And he's like, they took every single one from this menu in like such an extreme way. I mean, even they changed the corporate structure so the tax benefits would accrue to Adam personally. And it just felt, and then his wife was one of the people who would choose his successor if anything ever happened to him. So I think it really was the sum total. Plus, I think some of the just ridiculous language, they were going to elevate the world's consciousness, and that they were losing. I mean, the pure financials were just terrible. No one could, you add those all up, and it just seemed immediately everything turned.
Like a train wreck.
Yes.
And so let me ask, and I want to ask what happens when the train wreck becomes visible. But at this point, there is still a board of directors for this company, right? There is theoretically, if the bankers aren't going to be the adults in the room, there is the last resort, which is the board, the people who can hire and theoretically fire Adam, the people who the buck is supposed to stop with. Adam's on the board. What does the board do, and why don't they step in and make things right?
Yeah, so the board had been actually had a pretty good roster of smart people on it. People there, the investors there from the early days, and then kind of growing over time to include SoftBank representatives. And all along the way, they had often been pushing back against Adam and saying, I don't think we should really buy a jet. And he'd be like, and then fight with them, and they'd approve things unanimously, because at the end of the day, he always had this sort of trump card of, well, I control the company at the end of the day, so I could blow up the board and put my own directors in or outnumber you. And sort of, he always had this nuclear option. So in the end, they all decided to always vote for him, which is still a little perplexing to me. I mean, if they didn't like buying a jet, why didn't you just vote against the jet? And if 5 of them out of the 7 or 9 do it, then you don't buy the jet. They'd been acquiescing, for years. And then I think toward the end, they started to get more and more realizing that things were particularly unsteady, and the stock wasn't going up again and again as it had. They get more cautious. So right toward the end, apparently what happened was Adam missed a board meeting. Now, he always was missing board meetings. You'd have his employees go in his place. But the directors finally were upset about this and like, we have to confront Adam. And this was like weeks before they collapsed. And so they told him, you have to start coming to board meetings. I think what basically was happening was they were blinded by the rising stock price and being like, what does it really matter? I'd prefer that we not buy jets and wave pools, but this guy can sell anything to anyone. And, as long as there's more people like me in the future, then we're going to be, riding high.
And as long as I get rich, I don't really need to worry about what happens to anyone else. And the thing that's so delicious about this is that while all of this is happening, you guys are basically chronicling in real time every single thing that's happening in the Wall Street Journal. It was like I would like pick up the paper and see an article by the two of you, and it was like this like little burst of joy in my heart because I was about to learn about some new like crazy thing that just happened because the place is leaking like crazy. As far as I can tell, there's people calling you immediately after having meetings with Adam, and Crystal, who's in the audience, asked a good question, which is Newman or WeWork, are they dialoguing with you? Are they trying to manipulate you? Like, what are you hearing from the company itself as you're basically cataloging this catastrophe that's unfolding?
I mean, I think as it got like with each passing day, once this IPO prospectus was like flipped public and it looked more and more dire, it just felt like everyone was talking to us. And you were, there was the messaging was harder, I think, to control because there was so many different voices that we were hearing from that we felt like it was giving us a really clear picture. And, we saw that much more once we started writing the book. But I think people were freaked out. People were so annoyed at Adam Neumann at that point, that they had just kind of woken up to the fact that he's going to like crush this company potentially.
Yeah, it was it was this really fun evolution where, we had been like, I started covering them in 2013, and it was always really hard to get any info, and people weren't that skeptical. And then it would just be on the calls with the PR people and other executives there, and they'd be sighing at my questions. And one time the top executive wanted to hang up on me, and it's like, this call's over, like 2 questions in. And these were like pretty reasonable questions. It's like, don't you need more money? Why aren't you profitable yet? I'm endearing. Who'd want to hang up on me? Then, it's really hard to get info. But as things start, as the tower's foundation is crumbling and it's shaking, our jobs got much easier, I think, in that people started just like messaging me on Twitter being like, here's what Adam just said at an all hands meeting. It's like, wow, that was a freebie.
So you guys are getting all these leaks. The S1 has come out. Everyone realizes it's completely crazy. The company's crazy. The board isn't stepping in. It becomes clear that they cannot do this IPO, and the company basically has to put its tail between its legs and like either figure out whether to declare bankruptcy or what to happen. And I imagine that because this is a perfect story of business, that Adam gets his comeuppance. He gets all of his money taken away. He has to personally declare bankruptcy, and he slinks away, right?
Completely. Yeah. The company is they're going to run out of money, basically. And Adam's left his role as CEO. He's essentially pushed out. And they're racing to save the company and get an investment. And exactly the opposite of what you say. We're chronicling all of this, trying to understand, I couldn't believe it. After the IPO is called off, he resigns as CEO. And I just remember someone said, oh, they're going to be bankrupt in 6 weeks if they don't get more money. It was like unthinkable. They didn't even have enough money to pay for layoffs. So yeah, there was a rush to raise financing. And I remember one morning very early, I get a call from someone who was in, one of these rescue meetings. It was like, okay, the deal's done. They got the financing. People are going to be absolutely horrified when they learn the details of it. And this person gave me the details, and it was that Adam Neumann, as part of this package, and basically to get him, we look at founder control, it was to get him to give up his chairmanship of the board, his super voting control that would let him, vote against, have more power than all other shareholders. In order to do that, he basically got $185 million over 4 years as a non-compete consulting contract. And a total package worth about $1.7 billion, which included what he was able to sell in shares, refinancing of a $500 million loan. But it was just, exactly countered what should happen, this comeuppance. It was instead he's
rewarded.
Yes.
If you get $1.7 billion for falling flat on your face, why not fall flat all the time? That seems like the best thing I can imagine.
As one person put it to me, it was like Theranos, except instead of ending up on trial, he ended up a billionaire.
and I want to ask about WeWork today, but before I do, there's been a couple of questions that come in that are basically saying like, how can this happen, right? Susan Hopp had asked, who comes out of this with a recognized or acknowledged tarnished reputation? Crystal asks, has the board been held accountable for WeWork's collapse? I mean, I think a bigger question here is, you look at the system where a madman came in, he was empowered by bankers and by the board to do crazy things. He took $10 billion worth of money. He built a company that had thousands of employees, and he ran it into the ground. He blew it up in the most spectacular fashion. And there's real victims, right? There are employees who thought they were going to make money on their stock options who haven't. There are building owners who had these leases that became paranoid as to whether they were going to be honored. Let me ask you, when you look at this example, is this a suggestion that the system is broken? Like, this isn't how capitalism is supposed to work. Is WeWork an example that like something has actually gone wrong in capitalism?
Yes, it is. I mean, one of the scariest parts for us is that we haven't learned anything from this. There was a very brief period of introspection in sort of Silicon Valley afterward, where people were talking about maybe we shouldn't just give founders control without asking any questions, and along with billions of dollars. And that lasted about 5 minutes. And so if you sort of fast forward to the pandemic and then what happened with tech stocks soaring back after that, things are really off to the races today. And, it's not in co-working companies, but you see these kind of flare-ups of bubbles in all sorts of parts of the tech sector, particularly like electric vehicles right now, space companies. I mean, you have all of the same dynamics at play because this is the system that we have designed or are content with. As sort of members of this capitalistic society.
We rewrote our epilogue like 4 times. It's like first there was we've learned some lessons, and then it's like it kept on getting worse as we were going to print.
And to Crystal's question, has the board been held accountable? Like, has anyone actually come out of this, except for the employees, except for late stage investors? Has anyone come out of this worse than they went in? Has anyone been punished for allowing this bad behavior to occur?
No.
It doesn't. No. I mean, even the bankers who were like some of the key bankers, I mean, they've gotten promotions on this. I don't think any board member, I mean, perhaps reputationally, but also it sort of faded away. It's kind of incredible.
Yeah, you can see with Masayoshi Son, it really did, it probably still lingers, really did hurt his reputation because he'd been kind of developing this, like, I'm a tech oracle. And then you sort of look back and it's like made some of the pretty clearest, like some incredibly dumb decisions in the second largest startup investment ever. And so I think he wasn't able to raise a second vision fund from outside investors, which is the world's largest investment fund. But I mean that he had some good hits elsewhere, and so he's reestablishing his great reputation as a brilliant tech investor. So I think that lessons here are relatively few. On the other hand, you could say, well, Adam Neumann was really hoping to be a trillionaire. And so as a mere billionaire, he's clearly been humbled.
Yeah. I'm not sure how humbling that really is. And I will say, I feel the same way. This guy, Bruce Dunleavy, who was on the board, one of the early investors, who was kind of seen as this intellectual and this guiding light in Silicon Valley, and basically helped make a bunch of decisions that ran this company into the ground. And doesn't seem to have suffered for it at all. His firm still made millions and millions of dollars, 1,000% return on their investment, and it doesn't seem like he's not getting invited to parties anymore. And I think that's kind of a disappointment, right? That I think our system only works when there are consequences for bad actions. I think that's why everyone's asking questions about who gets punished for this, because if there's no punishment, why would anyone not just do this again? Which brings us to the WeWork of today. So 2 questions came in. One from Jack Cameron, who says WeWork was up $3.2 billion in revenue in 2020 last year. Does this signify a return to their former glory under their new leadership? And Leanne asks, now that Adam is out, what are your opinions on the trajectory of the company? Adam Neumann has been pushed out of the company. It's now owned essentially by SoftBank, although one part of the board is suing another part of the board to determine who has to pay who. But as you look at this company under new leadership, what do you think it's going to be 2 or 3 years from now, or 5 or 10?
I think it's a little early to say, but it seems like no matter what, it's going to be a real estate company. I mean, they've hired a veteran of the real estate industry to run this company. They're shedding all these, we didn't even talk about this, but they're not going to take over education. Like, they've gotten rid of their education. They've gotten rid of wave pools. They're very much focused on office space, subleasing office space. So it's unclear. I mean, there's a world in which right now, if companies do shed their long-term space, maybe WeWork could really take off, and companies will use WeWorks and want this flexible office space option more and more. So it could really kind of capitalize off of these new trends, but it's too soon to say. But I think no matter what, it is a real estate, a more modest company, even on the bigger scale than it was than other competitors.
Hey, Elliot, you mentioned that you feel like we haven't learned that Silicon Valley and investors and haven't learned any lessons from WeWork. But let me ask you, after both of you wrote this book, what are the lessons that we should have learned? Like when we look back at this period, 10 or 15 years from now, the same way that we look back at the 1980s and we say, God almighty, I can't believe that that stuff happened. What are the lessons that we should learn from WeWork, from this period? How ought things to change?
I think this is a little more philosophical, but I think one, at least for me, one of the takeaways that I took and sort of hope others would have is just how easy it is for minds to bend. And so how easy it is for us to just, in times of these bubbles and gluts of capital, how easy it is for us just to follow others, essentially off cliffs. And so critical thinking is not that hard to employ. I mean, I took an econ class in college and math in middle school and was able to sort of sit pretty early and see like, well, this is a real estate company and not a tech company. And then was looking at all these sort of, smart minds in finance, be like, yeah, I guess it could, elevate the world's consciousness. And so I think it's really important to stay grounded in reality. And I don't have a perfect solution on how to do that because clearly money is what's driving this at the end of the day. But that's sort of the guiding light of this stuff. If something seems like too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah. And I think, the true tragedy of this, I do think, is that, there's one Adam Neumann, for better or worse. He was a visionary. He had the ability to get people to give him money, but also to guide his employees to do things that they never thought they could do. I think few other people could have built the company he did. But what if the board had stood up to him and said, whether it's voting control or don't have a private jet, that's insane. That's, that nothing good is going to come out of that. Nothing good is going to come out of you borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars against your stock. What if they had reined him in? Could this have been... they have channeled him to let him build this really incredible company? And I think that's the system, as you said, sort of the broken system. If it wasn't in all the places each step of the way where the people should have stood up to him, maybe this could have fulfilled some of its ambitions. And it was a pretty amazing company in some ways.
Yeah. And hopefully because of books like the book you guys wrote, that tomorrow and a decade from now, the next generation of investors and venture capitalists and board members and CEOs, they read this and it serves as a reminder of how easily we can start drinking our own Kool-Aid and how quickly we can become crazy and think that craziness is an elevation of the world's consciousness. Thank you, you guys. Thank you to all of you guys. Thank you to the audience for your amazing questions. And before we sort of wrap everything up, there's this tradition here at the Commonwealth Club, which is to ask our speakers the following question, which is, what is your 60-second idea to change the world? And I'm interested, especially given how the front seat you guys had to the last decade, to hear what both of yours are. Maureen, will you kick it off for us?
Can I just take one? I don't know how controversial this is at this moment, but it feels like we're starting to see this, but we're in this global pandemic that could be over very soon if every corporation, every restaurant, everybody mandated vaccines and masks. It just feels like such a simple moment, and it's top of mind, not related to the book, but feels like we could be out of this very quickly. And corporate America, it feels like corporate global corporations, we're starting to see it. But if this happened quickly, it could catalyze change on a broad scale, I think, very quickly.
And Elliot?
So this is an unformed thought, but or partial answer. But one of my obsessions is our sort of lack of truth and shared fact, and that's not just a political statement that happens in Silicon Valley. That happens with meme stocks, where we lose track of real facts. I think there's some sort of way of modernizing what we did with radio and TV where we said, okay, you can broadcast on our airwaves, but you also have to give an hour of news a day so people have a shared set of facts. How do you do that in the internet age? That's where my thought ends. Someone else has to figure that one out. But some way of sort of pushing facts that are widely agreed upon at others, so we have a shared sense of truth.
And what I love about what you guys both said is that it actually does kind of tie into the book, and that you both have said, look, we need communalism, right? We need something that takes a community and actually makes it a community. Whether that means that we all have to get vaccinated so that we don't make our neighbors sick, whether that means that we have to force us to have at least some common reference of information so that we can all talk with each other. And of course, Adam, who grew up on a kibbutz, always celebrated community, always said that he called it we work because it was all about we, until the evils of greed and ego and craziness trickle in and destroy even the best communal instincts. But that being said, thank you to all of you, because you are part of a community. You chose to tune in this evening and become part of this community and ask questions and support amazing books like The Cult of We, which you should all definitely buy. And I think that that is the cause for hope, that we do come together as a community and we educate each other and we look out for each other, and that we have such great authors who take the time to try and tell us what we ought to know. So a huge thank you to you, Maureen Farrell, and to Elliot Brown for joining me today at Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. You should definitely go buy their book, The Cult of We, WeWork, Adam Neumann, and the Great Startup Delusion. It can be purchased through your preferred bookseller. Tell a friend to buy a copy. And if you'd like to watch more virtual programs or to support the Commonwealth Club's efforts in making virtual programming, please visit commonwealthclub.org/online. I'm Charles Duhigg. Thanks for joining us this evening, and good luck in building a better world.